Hello, assalamu alaikum everybody. Hope you're all safe, sound, and healthy. And heat waves have begun. Imagine we were praying for rains to stop, and now we are hoping it should start raining again. That's how life is. Well, anyway, nobody wants a tea storm every day, you know. You just want a nice pitter patter of a nice, comforting rain, is all I'm saying. Okay. I am here today because I'm going to talk about something which I have actually literally talked about in so many different ways, in my own way. But the interesting thing here is that the reason why I just want to focus on one of these things. In fact, I have actually focused on it in so many ways again. But still, here I'm going to focus on it in reference to, or with reference to, George Orwell and his teacher, Aldous Huxley, right? And I'll tell you why. Because one of my students, one of my former students, postgraduate students, the interesting thing is because she was actually a literature student, and I was, um, when I taught at university, there's always, more than two subjects that you're required to teach, even if you were an associate professor or even if you're a visiting faculty. And actually you're supposed to have at least three, but anyway, so point is, two of my majors were, one was my actual, which is what I was teaching the very first batch of postgraduates, the very first batch of film and TV postgraduates. I taught them script writing. And undergrads, or graduation students, you can say, I taught them French. Um, and it was French level one, obviously, because that was when, from any department, in every department, when they had this optional classes in, or elective classes, where, no, optional classes, sorry, where you can literally just choose an extra, which in American or in European terms could be a minor. So there is a subject in which you major, and then there's a subject in which you minor. Over here, the subjects in which we major are called electives, and the subjects in which we minor as undergrads, those are called optionals. So those optionals build on, obviously, and add bonuses and credits to your score, to your total GPA. So in my French, obviously, is one of the most popular options that you get, apart from Arabic and Persian, because it's always good to have an extra language. So yeah, so as I said, I practically taught half the university in French. But some of the very interesting students that I had were obviously of literature, and this is one of them. And I've actually kept in contact with her because not only was she a student of mine later on, she kind of worked on editing one of my books as well, in which I offered to let her earn an experience of editing when she first, I asked her if she was interested in learning about editing and all, and she was. And later on, she went on to actually become qualified as an editor. So I had offered her my books and said that, you know what, they need editing, and before I do a final publishing, I need a good editor. So this could be a good chance for you to learn and gain experience, and it would be a good chance for me to train you on basic editing and tell you, what are the basic things you need to look out for apart from just punctuations and all. And she was, to be fair, pretty good at her job. But okay, so as I said, now she's a qualified academic, and she's a qualified editor, and she's, obviously already qualified in literature. And she shared this very interesting post, which obviously was shared before by other people, but I mean, she just reshared it. And this post was, I think, originally by Students for Liberty. Yeah. They are working towards a freer future. Yeah. So they had actually posted, this was, they're the OG posters of this. And so they basically very nicely summarized the debate between Orwell and his former teacher Huxley. And so, I'll read through the posts for clarity first, and then I'll come on to, then you'll realize why I'm saying that this is something I've already talked about in so many ways already, because this is basically what to them was the dystopian country is today our reality. So 4 months after George Orwell published 1984, his former teacher Aldous Huxley sent him a letter saying that he had described the wrong dystopia. Um, the now Two of the greatest dystopian minds of the 20th century clashed over how we would ultimately lose our freedom. In Orwell's vision, the state controls through fear. Surveillance cameras in every room, thought police hunting dissent, history rewritten daily to match whoever holds power. A branch of government called the Ministry of Truth exists to manufacture lies. Its enforcer, O'Brien, describes the endgame plainly, and I quote, a boot stamping on a human face forever. October 21st, 1949, Huxley writes from White Hood, California. He tells Orwell, the boot on the face model is unstable. Violence creates friction. Friction creates martyrs. Martyrs create resistance. It is too costly to sustain forever. The smarter path make the cage comfortable enough that no one looks for the door. His prediction, written 77 years ago, the lust for power can be just as completely satisfied by suggesting people into loving their servitude as by flogging and kicking them into obedience. And this is, again, remember, I talked about something very similar but in a different way, and I'll come back to that. Before writing Brave New World, Huxley had spent 2 years as Orwell's French teacher at Eton in 1917 when Orwell was a teenager named Eric Blair. The letter was not an abstract debate between strangers. It was a teacher telling his former student, I have been watching the same forces you have. We drew different conclusions, and I think mine will prove correct. Why did Huxley think pleasure would win over pain as a control mechanism? Because pain is palpable. A population that knows it is oppressed can name its oppressor, organize against it, and fight back. The history of every revolution runs on that logic. Pleasure is different. A population that is comfortable has no grievance to organize around. The cage doesn't need guards if the prisoner has stopped looking for the door. Rational rulers eventually discover that a happy slave is cheaper than a frightened one. Okay. And this is now where I'll end reading, and then I'll pick on all these points and tell you and see if you remember how I've talked about them in my previous podcast, right? Now, first of all, it is amazing. It is amazing how George Orwell had literally painted a very precise picture on technology, on surveillance. I mean, one would say technology, but obviously at his time, he mainly talked about surveillance. But how would surveillance be possible? He mentioned surveillance cameras in every room. So that in itself should tell you that he had already seen it coming, which again, as I said, this is something about people who open their eyes to their surroundings and who listen to their instincts, you see. When we are all brought up, we are all born with a very sharp instinct, which is our sixth sense. This sixth sense is our connection with the world and our connection with our spirit, our connection with our unconscious mind, okay? And we are all very, very aware of it as kids. At least I was. I don't know, but I think, yes, most of us kids are aware of it as kids. And I think as the unfortunate part is that as people grow up, they tend to shed it. They tend to question it. They tend to doubt it. Doubting is a good thing. Questioning is also a good thing. But then you need to just do it in a way where, for example, I kept on questioning my instincts every single time. I kept on questioning my foresight every single time. I was always challenging myself to be wrong. Unfortunately, I was hardly ever wrong. And I say unfortunately with great grievance here. So yeah, unfortunately, I was almost always proven right. And I had to bow down to my unconscious mind, my instincts being so right. But you see, as I said, then when you learn that you need to listen to your instincts, then you need to hone it and develop it. And I actually honed and developed my instincts consciously as I grew older, until there was a point when I saw too much, and there was no point in seeing everything that I saw, because we're surrounded by idiots. You see, that's where I'm going to come to again, this whole thing. We're surrounded by idiots, we're surrounded by know-it-alls, we're surrounded by people who always have an argument. And so there's no point in you yapping about something that you see when nobody's going to listen. So then you start to break that connection because it's too painful to see what you see. So, he saw what he saw. And I'm sure majority of the people thought that, oh, this is pure fiction. It's amazing how technology, since when did mankind ever be able to reach that lengths? But again, my argument here, as you know, is that each civilization before us that was destroyed, we know because Islam tells us that each civilization before us that was destroyed reached their peaks. Each and every one of them reached their peaks. They reached their peaks in technology, or they reached their peaks in skills, or they reach their peaks in knowledge, whatever it is, every civilization. So I come to this conclusion every single time I think about it, and every single time I sift through everything, is that the older ancient civilizations that got destroyed after they reached their peak basically gained all that knowledge that we have now. They gained all that knowledge, they used and abused all that knowledge, and then they finally self-destructed because of all that knowledge, And I think that every new generation starts from, or every new civilization, starts from scratch, because that knowledge gets lost. And then we start from scratch, rebuilding, reaccessing the same knowledge, because I think the same knowledge has existed throughout the ages. And every single civilization has tapped into it. Every civilization reached that peak and then self-destructed, imploded. And we are going through the same thing. It's a cycle. And the civilization after us will again start from scratch, by the way, to a large extent, despite everything. So that's where we stand, okay? That's one point. Now, another point, keeping all of that aside and rendering it debatable, then one would say that, oh, he produces an amazing fiction. But obviously his teacher, being his teacher, and his teacher seeing what he was also seeing, knew that this dystopian world that he was describing was not essentially fiction. It was true. And here is the thing. You cannot just have surveillance without having physical power. And that is exactly what is described here, in the dystopian world created by Orwell, where whoever holds power will change history every day. That is what we call changing the narrative, right? We always talk about how the governments, they keep changing the narratives, they keep changing the stories, and they keep lying to the people. And the media is always involved. The media that claims to be the fourth pillar of the state is actually just with the other three, joining with them, literally, to wreak havoc and to set new narratives and to create new stories. So at the end of the day, the media is not an independent fourth pillar after all, which is again something I've talked about in some of my previous podcasts at length, when I've talked about how even social media will ultimately obviously become a part of the government tool and will be used as part of the narrative, because anything and everything that you have access to, obviously the government will have greater access to, So there you are. Now, as he says, and I agree with him, that you cannot have one without the other. You cannot just have surveillance without ultimately ending it with boots on the ground, okay? And especially boots on the human face forever, because that is the ultimate goal here. As I said, we're dealing with demented, insane, narcissistic, God-complexed people, okay? There are a fistful of them, and we can literally identify them and get rid of them, but they know human nature. They know the human psychology. The human psychology is inherently one that does not want to fight. Actually, that is what they have identified over the ages as well. The vast majority of humans, they are averse to arguments, they are averse to fights, they are averse to such kinds of mental and physical exhaustion, okay? And it is keeping that in mind that certain people who enjoy fights, who enjoy complexities, who enjoy challenges, mental challenges, and physical challenges, who enjoy to push as much as they can to see how much they can get. Those people then, they learn to, or they have learned over the ages, how to better manipulate people. And that is what Huxley has, basically argued about, saying that in his opinion, the dystopian world that we're going towards is that where ultimately the human psychology will be used to control humans, in the sense that when you have people living in some semblance of comfort, or some semblance of some illusion of comfort, they will obviously happily stay in servitude. And this is, again, strangely, funnily enough, this is also something that I have talked about so many times. But now, again, this is where I'm going to compare the two, because my point on these two is, especially on this point where he says, that there is friction. Friction will cause violence. It will cause resistance, and that is the logic of revolution throughout history. And again, if you remember, these are points that I made as well. But at the same time, my point is, you haven't been to Pakistan. In fact, my points have always been comparing this logic to Pakistan and seeing how this logic miserably fails in Pakistan. Because now this is where, again, I'll now tell you the difference, which I've, again, mentioned many times, but here I'll now specifically mention it again. The difference here is you've got two types of nations that you have made, right? One is a nation that they decided that, okay, we'll keep them in comfort, we'll give them whatever it is that they want, we'll at least meet their basic needs and everything. And when they will get what they want, and when, as long as their lives are comfortable, they're not going to come after us, right? And then we'll give them the illusion of control, the illusion of power, which is the illusion of democracy. And I have always said that this is an illusion that the Western world maintained quite for a very long time. This is the illusion that they sold even to their own bureaucrats. So half their bureaucrats are also still living under the illusion that people have the power and this is a democracy. So this is a pretty illusion, okay? When you keep such a pretty illusion running, then because if you remember, I talked specifically about this illusion when I talked about how people realize time and again that this is an illusion when they try to exercise their power and are clamped down. For example, Black Lives Matter, when the whole movement began, I think they realized that, yeah, there is no democracy in America, and that people holding the power is not entirely true, and that the government is not exactly a democracy. And number two, go back even further to Vietnam. How the people of America, when they realized how America lied to them, and that the war against Vietnam was a big lie, and it was a fraud and a scam, and it was basically an invasion project, very similar to today, which we have Iran, except that in Iran, America didn't even have the time to lie to its people, so the people were already pissed off and against it. But see, again, during the whole Vietnam thing, people came out in the streets. They were beaten. They were called communists. They were called God knows what. They were called druggies. They were called hippies. And they were jailed and imprisoned. And it became a literal police state. And so the people even that time kept on saying that, oh, America is actually a police state. This is the true colors of America. You need to open your eyes to see this truth, that there is no democracy, right? But then again, people very conveniently forgot everything after that whole movement. And as you can see, the people failed in that movement because America went on until when, as usual, things went wrong and they had nowhere to fall on, and they fell onto Bangladesh, pretending to help Pakistan for that. Now, but obviously ended up ruining things. Now, we come here to the present, Iran. People are against it. Okay, let's go even before that, Iraq. People, again, woke up. You see how it's ironic, the people who seem to have the power, who live in the illusion that they have the power, that they have the awareness, that they have this and blah blah blah, and yet they always seem to wake up after the fact. which, as I say, is no longer an excuse for the American people, because as I'm counting even now, look way back when, from Vietnam even, consider Vietnam your benchmark. Move on till today for Iran. Tell me, how many times is it that the Americans very conveniently woke up very late? Why is it that they always wake up after the fact? 9/11, they woke up after the fact, after the damage was done. After America already went after the countries it wanted to go after in order to steal the resources. Iraq, again, they wanted to steal resources. They wanted to take control. Every country is, which remember I talked about reverse imperialism. So you can listen to that podcast for the great details on that. But I mean, yeah. So basically, putting it out there in a layman's term, the Western governments applied two models, which shows both Huxley and Orwell to be right. So they had one model which they applied to their own people in the beginning, and that is give them whatever they want, make them comfortable, and let them happy, just happily swim in their fantasy world of their illusionary world that they have control. And in other countries, like ours, which were their former colonies or which they wanted to colonize or whatever, if for those countries, to stop those countries from going back to their glory days, from going back to being developed countries that they were before they were invaded, and to keep control over them, they controlled their governments. Any government that came without their approval has always been ousted or killed, as we can see. Any government that comes through the right way, through the legitimate way, and serves the interests of their people, go against the Western interests and then have to be removed. And I'm talking about the Western countries, not just America and the UK, but you have France and you have Germany and Italy also involved at some point or another, but especially France, England, and America, obviously. America, again, as I said, is in itself a colony of the British, and they're basically doing the British bidding. So there you are. So look at it, and look at our countries where they make sure that they keep those people who serve their purpose and who serve their interests and who ensure that our countries never become sovereign, right? Because these are the countries that they need to control and manipulate. These are the countries where they need to have boots on ground. These are the countries whose resources they will always need, be it human resources or be it mineral resources or be it rare earth minerals, be it, oil, be it gas, be it, any and everything that they may require, right? So they borrowed the Islamic democratic or legal or social infrastructures. They implemented it into their own world, and it was a success because, as I said, they managed to then sell the illusion of democracy, the illusion of equality, and the illusion of people being in control, which every time shatters. Literally, it shatters every single time the people come out into the streets for Palestine, or when they come out in the streets for Vietnam, or when they came out in the streets for Iraq, or when they came out in the streets for Iran, or when they came out in the streets. I mean, every single time they've noticed that it shatters. Everything shatters, right? So this is now whatever they have applied to our countries, they will now, once they have perfected it and once they've had everything here under control, they will now inversely apply it or reversely apply it in their own countries when the right time comes. And as you can see, they are doing that. In Britain, they are doing that. In other parts of Europe, in other different European countries, in Germany even, and then obviously they're doing that in America, where now they are literally becoming police states, which they made our states. They made our states police states. They saw that model through, they perfected it through, and now they're going to apply it to their own people, right? So this is how you basically end up getting both the dystopian worlds. Both Huxley and Orwell were right, because you need both at one point. You cannot just have one or the other, Both the models need to be applied depending on the situation and depending on the number of countries that you wish to control, or the, because after all, the world is not a small world, especially population wise. So they're always looking for ways to better their control over population. And my go-to has always been Animal Farm, because I think the way it has been explained is so much more apt compared to even any of the other dystopian books, because it is apt, as in, all pigs are equal, but some pigs are more equal, being all people are equal, but some people are more equal. So as even then, when I talked about Animal Farm, and I said that he was absolutely right, and you will see it, you can actually see it. Even then I said that basically what he is describing is essentially the hijacking of ideologies. That there's nothing wrong with the isms, be it communism, be it socialism, be it capitalism. There's nothing wrong with the isms. What is wrong is with the people who hijack these isms and how they twist it and how they change narratives and how they flip it to suit them. It is that same hypocritical approach with which we take religion. With which we take religion and then we twist it every which way to see how we can apply it to better suit us. Like the devil is in the details, in other words. So this is my point here. So when he talks about, this is what I was also arguing about, that if you look at the model that they used in the Western world, if you look at that model, and according to that model, if they start taking away from the people, then the people, because the people have been sold the story of control, of democracy, of power of the people, of democracy, of equality, of everything, those people will come out in the streets because you are getting in the way of their comforts. You're getting in the way of their basic rights. Now look at the model that is used in our countries. In our countries, you will keep on and on taking everything away from the people. They will still not rise. That is why I said to my student, when I was looking at Huxley's statement, and I was like, what I replied to her was, he definitely never came to Pakistan. Yeah, he never met Pakistanis. Because, that does not apply to the Pakistanis. To the Pakistanis, and, you keep on taking from them, and they will keep on looking for alternatives. You take light away from them, they'll get solar energy. You will try to take solar energy from them, then they will move to something. You take gas away from them, then they will buy a hot plate, or then they will buy an electric oven, or then they will buy, and then you take electricity from them, then they will source it from solar energy. Now you will try to take solar energy from them, then you see now people might push back because there is no other alternative. But still the pushback will not be as much as you would hope. The enslaved mentality, as opposed to the illusionary mentality, as in you have on one side the mentality of the people who are under the illusion that they have control over what their governments can and cannot do, that they have the power. And on the other hand, you have the enslaved mentality, where for centuries they have continued living enslaved and in servitude. And in fact, if you try to tell them that they have something called dignity, something called self-respect, which should enable them to fight, they will bury their heads further down into the sand, because they have been refined to be of that class, of that category, of those people who do not like to fight, who will do anything to keep themselves from working too hard to gain something, to fight to gain something. They will look for alternatives throughout their lives. As each alternative gets stripped away from them, they will still not fight. They will still not push back. They will still not decide that, oh, let's resist. It will still not cause enough friction for them to get up and resist. Because, first of all, their enslaved minds have made them too lazy to even entertain the thought. Okay? They're just too busy trying to make their lives easier in whichever way. And they're so used to the government never accommodating them. They're so used to the government never giving them their basic rights that they are now, for them, it doesn't matter if the government takes away even more, because they are so used to already trying to do everything themselves. This has always been the way in countries like ours, where we do things ourselves. We do not depend on the government. We have no expectations from the government. And we do not depend on any authorities, because we know that it's all on us and that we have to do it and we're on our own. But we always want a miracle. We don't want to fight, but we want a miracle. And then when that miracle gets buried, we still don't stand up, you know. We, as I've said, we are one of the luckiest states in the world, and also the unluckiest, that we have had the fortune to have not one, but two such leaders who could change the world. And both those leaders were working for Pakistan. One was Jinnah, who made Pakistan, and the other was Imran Khan, who wanted to finish Jinnah's task of making Pakistan ultimately a sovereign state. Jinnah was killed, and Imran Khan, there were at least 2 to 3 attempts on his life, and he's now in jail being slow poisoned. This is where we stand. What did our people do for Jinnah or for his sister when they were killed, or for Liaquat Ali Khan when he was killed, or for Bhutto when he was killed? Nothing. Our army and our authorities have now constantly, as I've said before, they have constantly experimented on people, saying, let us see how much we can push the people and how much they can take. And our people have shown that they can take it. And this is why today we are where we are, where we have completely lost everything, where now the governments are no longer pretending, but they are now openly harming us. They are openly causing us loss. They are openly trying to dominate us. They're openly trying to subjugate us. And they're openly trying to turn this into an army state, which they've done many times. But even before, there was a limit, a boundary they did not cross. This time they decided to cross all the limits and all the boundaries because, hey, these people, they're never going to stand up. We have done everything to see if these people have a limit, and they don't. So we can do whatever we want to them, and they can still not rise up against us. They cannot push back. The few people, the minorities of the huge population who do have dignity, who do have self-worth, who do have knowledge, who do have awareness, we can crush them. Because it's easier to crush, as I've said a million times, it's easier to crush a few thousands of people as opposed to millions of people. So they could do nothing. For example, when millions of people came into the streets with Imran Khan. But now millions of people are not coming out. Thousands. You have pockets here, pockets there. That's easy to control. Thousands of people are easy to control. Millions are when you get pushback. That is when the government is forced back. And they know that was never going to happen. And this is why they kidnap those few thousands who rise up against them. They kidnap them, they torture them, they put them in jail without any due process. They harass their loved ones. They torture their loved ones. They steal from them. They take away their businesses. They take away their homes. They take away their jobs. They take away their family members. That's what they're doing to shut them up, basically. That's boots in your face. That's Orwell's boots on your face. They're going by that strategy. Whereas in the West, they're following Huxley's model, where they're saying that, let's just keep everybody happy, and they wouldn't look at us. and they'll, and then we will be free to do whatever it is that we want to do. These are the two models that the same people are applying on two different states. You understand? But ultimately, it will be Orwell's model. It will be boots on the face. It will be police state, ultimately. And that will happen when they have prepared enough to maintain that control over their people. And this is why all those conspiracies were not conspiracy theories, but actual conspiracies. When there was always talks about how authorities were working, especially Western authorities, were working towards population control, towards, minimizing, like how we had COVID. And we all know COVID was man-made. We know that it was manufactured in a lab in America, not in China, in America. We know that it was America that released it in China. We know that China was aware of the fact that America was planning this conspiracy of releasing this virus, so China was already prepared. We know that nobody contracted that virus from any part of the world from China, but the majority of the world contracted the virus from Europe and America. Isn't that amazing? They were thinking they would blame China, and they will, but they couldn't because it backfired, And China immediately followed all the protocols, which, by the way, were the protocols that were followed by the Muslims as well, eons ago, by the Prophet himself, peace be upon him. And that is closing everything, isolating the area that is affected and infected, and then working on maintaining health conditions and completely shutting off movement. So you basically cordon off the whole area. You cordon off the infected area, and then you cordon off the whole country, because nowadays we are at a point where we are a global village, physically speaking. So China followed all those protocols. Pakistan followed protocols. But England refused to follow protocols. America refused to follow protocols. Isn't that strange? Don't you find it strange? These are paranoid authorities. England and America, the Western governments, are by nature paranoid, and yet they refused to follow protocols. They refused to respect Pakistan's protocols. And so in Pakistan, the virus cases, and Iran, sorry to say, but even Iran refused to respect Pakistan's boundaries and to follow protocols. So the first cases that came to Pakistan were from Iran and Britain. There was not a single case from China. Not a single case. Believe it or not. And again, why Pakistan was better off than the Western world is, where the Western world had this conspiracy going on that the injections given to them were basically the infertility injections, or the injections that were basically not going to boost your immune system, but to further weaken your immune system, so that now you can contract any and every disease that will come your way and you can die like flies. But again, opposing, or that, like in let's just say, Pakistan did not choose to use those injections, let's put it this way, or that medication, and instead again collaborated with China to use the antidote that China had made. And the people of Pakistan are better off for that. But it is true that COVID itself had already compromised the immune system of most of the people who had contracted it. And it is true that people still died of COVID. And it is also true that people who did not even have COVID seemed to have gotten COVID or pneumonia in hospitals. Yeah, so people who actually did not even have COVID, they contracted COVID in hospitals. And there were people who contracted pneumonia in hospitals, and this is going on till date. Yeah, till date there have been cases of especially pneumonia being contracted in hospitals, and sometimes doctors call it COVID, and sometimes they call it pneumonia, and God knows what it really is. But it shows that our hospitals need to work on their hygiene, and they need to work on disinfecting their premises, by the way. I mean, it's a hospital, for crying out loud. And yet the amount of diseases and viruses, obviously, that you will find in a hospital cannot be found anywhere else in any other public space. So this is where we're standing today, okay? The point is, it depends on the kind of society that you have modeled. If you have modeled a society on the illusion of democracy and on the illusion of people having power, then you also add to that comfort and you give them comfortable lives, then you will get a different result. And then if you have people whom you have subjugated right from the start, they are enslaved, they do not know how to live any other way, so they have lost their will to resist. There will be no friction no matter what you strip away from them. There will be no friction no matter what you take away from them, because even if they will fight, for example, if you're taking something away from me, even if I will fight you, there will be nobody standing with me. I will be fighting you alone. And as I said, that is why you have pockets. You have pockets of people in Pakistan who are fighting back. But because these are pockets of people, so they're essentially alone. The whole of Pakistan is not fighting with them. The day the whole of Pakistan will realize that they need to fight and that they need to stand united, believe me, not a single person will go to jail, not a single person will get killed, because it's easy to control a pocket full of people. But it's not easy to control a whole nation. That's the difference. So the difference is in the mentality, the difference is in the model of society you create. But ultimately, it is all going to be a police state. Ultimately, it is going to be boots in your face. Okay? Unless you ensure through a mass movement that it doesn't come to that point. And again, this is another thing also I've talked about in my previous podcasts, that every single revolution has had the same problem. Every time a revolution succeeds, every time you think you're setting up a new government, you become nonchalant again. Because this is human nature. You see, again, this is human nature. The reason we have a government, the reason we have always had governments throughout history is because essentially, as I said, man does not want to fight. Man does not want to constantly exhaust his body and his mind. So man appoints those people who like to fight, who like to exhaust their bodies and their minds. Man then appoints those people as his representative, and they become civil servants for that reason, and then they become governments. Okay, that is how and why governments are always made, so that a few people who love to fight and who love to debate and who love to take power into their hands and who love to challenge themselves and who love to perform difficult tasks, those people are then put center front and left to do whatever it is that they want to do, while the rest of us continue to live nonchalantly, which is essentially what we want to do. We don't want all of that, so we delegate it. But then when we delegate it and then we sit back and we once again relax and we become once again complacent, that is where it goes wrong again. Because power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. That is a fact. It is very, very apt. So when you sit back and relax and you do not ensure vigilance, because as I said, essentially man is complacent. Man doesn't want to do all of that. So your complacency brings you back full circle to needing another revolution.
And this is me signing out. Khuda Hafiz.